The religious really want to believe that their religions are rational, but they're not. They're just not. The kind of absurd hoops that they jump through just to give themselves any hope in hell of convincing anybody, I guess that's entertaining in and of itself. We like entertainment around here after all, so let's do some more of that. Coming up next. This is a blog entry, I think, maybe, I don't know, that's kind of what it looks like to me anyway, from Neil Shenvi, who describes it as Christian apologetics from a homeschooling theoretical chemist. And in my never-ending quest to find any Christian, or any other theist for that matter, who can set aside their faith and just provide good reasons to believe, I'm going to do a deep dive into, well, whatever the hell this is. I don't want to give too much away. So, is belief in God irrational? Will he be able to make a case to convince us otherwise? And I really wouldn't be holding my breath if I were you, but I figure we've got a good reason to doubt that any theist will ever manage it, because we've had an awful lot of experience with other theists, and they've been generally shit. But let's give it a shot and see. Is belief in God rational? No, at least not as far as I'm concerned. Of course, I guess that depends on how you define rational, so let's just do that up front because I want to be accurate as much as I can. I'm going to go with based on or in accordance with reason or logic, because I think that one most people can probably accept. There's certainly going to be nuance, but in general, I think that if you were using reason and logic, and especially if it's based on strong evidence, that's going to make it pretty rational. However, when it comes to the religious, in this case, although I certainly think it does apply to a lot of people on a lot of non-religious topics, they tend to think, well, anything that I think I have a good reason for, that's rational. And of course, you get to define what you mean by good reason, and emotional comfort is certainly in the mix. But that's not rational, though, and that's why it's so important that we pick a single definition and we stick to it, because otherwise we get absolutely nowhere. So I can't talk to Neil and get him to agree to my definition, which I think he probably wouldn't. So let's just continue and just see how this stacks up. Belief in God can certainly be irrational. We might believe in God because we like the idea of God's existence, or because religious behavior has financial or social benefits. Sure, and lots of people do. And I'm happy to see that he at least admits that. That is a positive sign. However, I'm willing to bet that the vast majority of Christians out there, that is exactly what they do. They believe because it makes them happy, but being happy isn't being rational. They believe because it provides emotional comfort, but being emotionally comforted, that isn't rational. For the apologists, they certainly profess belief because it lines their wallets, but that doesn't make those beliefs in and of themselves rational. No, when I'm talking about a rational theist, I mean someone who doesn't do any of that. Oh, they might have faith, but that isn't their primary reason for believing. When I say that I am looking for a rational theist, I mean somebody who can leave their faith and their fifis at the door and explain how they came to these conclusions rationally. Not by faith, not by fifis. How did you get there, and can you show the steps to show me how you did? Walk me through those steps and present the evidence that convinced you that any of this was real. And like I said, no faith required, no faith involved. And those are the people that I never, ever, ever see, and that's a problem. In these cases, believing in God is a bit like believing in your city's professional baseball team. It has little to do with an intellectual belief and much more to do with your feelings. But if belief in God can be irrational, does it follow that belief in God is always irrational? I don't think so. Now, we'll get there in a second, but I did want to say that I do agree that believing in God is very much like believing in a baseball team, except you can actually prove the baseball team is real. It's more like believing in a Quidditch team, flying around on brooms, throwing things through hoops. It isn't demonstrable at all, and that's kind of the problem. A belief is rational if it is held on the basis of reason and logic rather than on the basis of emotion or pragmatism. Yes, but show me anyone who actually does that. And here's the problem. Let's just take a random religious statement. God created the universe. In order to evaluate that statement rationally, you need to break it down. First, you need to show that the universe was actually created. Not that you just like the idea, not that it sounds really good to you, but that it actually happened that way. So how do you do that? You can't. You have one and only one universe to look at, and therefore there is no way at all to determine if it was created because you've got absolutely nothing to compare it against. Secondly, though, even if you did accomplish that, and good luck on that, you'd have to show that your real existing God was responsible for creating it. And that requires that you can show that your God, your specific God, actually exists. Again, good luck on that. Because if you can't do that, then you are not being rational. You're just leaping to God done it because you really like the idea. And that is not how rationality works. You need to be able to take the faith out of it, and no theist can. If we can demonstrate that belief in God can be the consequence of a logical argument with justifiable premises, then it follows the belief can be rational. And that's an if, that's not a because. Now, I'm sure a lot of them would like to be able to do that, but liking a thing isn't the same as actually doing it. How do you get this done in a way that completely leaves fifis and faith behind? Because I do not think the religious can do it. At least, I've never seen a single theist who has ever gotten remotely close. They might start out okay, and then they just leap to God done it and call it a day. But you can't do that, though. So let's continue. I'd like to focus on one such argument in this essay, the moral argument for God's existence. And that is going to fail. Why? Because we've done the moral argument to death, and it never goes well for the religious. Now, maybe he's got a different take on it. I don't know, but I'll take it apart anyway and see where all of the unsupported assumptions are, because there are always unsupported assumptions, and they have no evidence for any of it, which is the problem. So we're going to rip apart the moral argument again. Won't that be fun? Many prominent atheist thinkers endorse both premises of this argument independently. If we conclude that these atheists present good, justifiable reasons for believing these two premises independently, then it seems rational to hold them simultaneously and to conclude that God exists. If so, then belief in God's existence can be rational. Well, I am not one of those atheists. What this really comes down to is, I have a faith-based position, and other people who I disagree with, they also have a faith-based position, slightly modified and not held rationally. Therefore, it somehow becomes rational because that's what I really want to believe. And I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way. The most common form of the moral argument runs as follows. Premise 1. If God does not exist, then objective moral facts do not exist. And no, that's a total bullshit premise. You can just insert anything in place of God, and it doesn't change anything. If invisible, intangible, universe-creating pixies do not exist, then objective moral arguments do not exist. But that doesn't mean anything. Insert any god. Just make something up and just stick it in there. It doesn't actually get you anywhere intelligent. So the first premise just falls under the weight of its own irrational, bald assumptions. It is not rational. Premise 2. Objective moral facts do exist. Really? Prove it. Go ahead. You can't. That is an assertion. It is not a statement of demonstrable fact. And yes, there are atheists who are also moral realists, but they are not being rational in holding the moral realist position. I have never seen a single person from any faith position at all who has ever made a decent case for objective morals. They just really want them to be real. And that's just another premise down because it relies entirely on your feelings, and your feelings don't mean anything. This is not going well, is it? But let's finish it up. Therefore, conclusion, God exists. Well, I'm sorry, but two failed premises just cause a failed conclusion. Now, the religious really like this argument because they really like the premises, but liking the argument doesn't make the argument true. Like I said, you can insert anything in place of God and it doesn't change anything, because I've seen Muslims using the exact same argument for Allah. Does that make Allah real? I don't think you're going to find any Christians who are going to agree with that, so the whole thing just fails under the weight of its own irrationality. And I hope nobody is at all surprised. By God, I mean a perfectly good, personal being whose commands are binding on all human beings. So what? You can't prove that any such thing actually exists, and if it doesn't exist, then the whole thing is completely meaningless. And this is an argument I have on pretty much a daily basis. In fact, I'm in the middle of having it right now, where the religious will say, well, that's the definition of God. According to who? Because I don't consent to that. That's not a definition that I agree to. That's a thing you made up in your head, and now you really want it to be true. But that doesn't make it true. But they can't accept that. They think that this crap their church tells them has to be true because fee-fees. And that's not rational. And this whole thing is supposed to be rational, so, yeah, let's not go there. Because this is something I've seen from the religious too. The whole idea that, well, we're just going to call that God, capital G, because they're really going to bum rush their way to the end zone so they can just say, well, see, I just proved God was real. It's why you can't let them get away with this crap. Because here's the thing. You can claim that the thing I'm talking about is this, but you haven't shown that any actual existing gods have any of those characteristics objectively. You can only assert it. You can't prove that it's true. So this is just a complete waste of time because it doesn't get you to your God, because you can't prove that your God is real. Next. By moral facts, I mean objective statements about which values and actions are good and evil or right and wrong. Cool, prove those exist. You won't be able to. Oh, but most people believe X. Yeah, but most isn't all, and what people believe isn't true. This is not universal, so you're just wrong. And this is where they start making excuses for why their claims don't actually look true in the real world. But people just want to sin. Well, that's an empty claim because you can't back it up. That's right back to faith and fee-fees, and we've already taken those completely off the table. Try something that you can actually prove. You need to be able to demonstrate that it's real, and I don't think you can do it. Next. For the purposes of this essay, I am not interested in whether either of these premises are true. Interested readers can see a discussion on this issue here, which I'm not doing at this moment. Instead, I merely want to ask whether both of these premises can be held for rational reasons on the basis of arguments rather than on the basis of emotion. I believe that they can. But you have to care about that because you're just asserting in the argument that it is true. That is just pure hand-wavium. He doesn't care if it's true because he can't show that it's true. He's just trying to get around that fact because I think he knows that he can't do it. He just wants to believe that it's true. But that doesn't make it true. So, no, if you're going to assert that this is true in your premises, then you need to be able to back them up in some verifiable way. Go ahead. We'll wait. Is premise 1 rational? Atheist philosopher J.L. Mackie writes in The Miracle of Theism that moral properties constitute so odd a cluster of properties and relations that they are most unlikely to have arisen in an ordinary course of events without an all-powerful God to create them. Okay, first of all, I don't give a shit what J.L. Mackie said. I don't care what anyone says. I care what can be independently validated using objectively verifiable evidence. And the religious love to do this. Well, Augustine said this. I don't care. I care what you can back up right now. So keep that in mind as you move forward. A guy said a thing means no more than my book said a thing. That is entirely irrelevant. Do better. His opinion was shared by French atheist Jean-Paul Sartre, who writes in his Existentialism is a Humanism that God does not exist and therefore disappears with him all possibility of finding value in the intelligible heaven. Everything is indeed permitted if God does not exist. Similar sentiments were expressed by Bertrand Russell and Friedrich Nietzsche, both of whom insisted that the non-existence of God entailed that moral facts were likewise non-existent. Again, who cares? What he's trying to do here is say, well, people who are atheists said things that I could agree with if I twist them just right, therefore they agree with me, even though if they were still alive, I have a feeling they would be doing nothing of the sort. This is a problem, though. Sorry, I don't care what anybody says. Come back with evidence that it's true. I don't care about people. I care about the facts. We'll be waiting for your facts. I just don't think we'll ever see any. The arguments of atheistic philosophers who affirm premise 1 of the moral argument are somewhat varied, but they share several features. First, they argue that objective moral values like love or justice seem to have no place in a reductively naturalistic universe. Yeah, except they do. Love, which is just an electrochemical reaction in the physical brain, it creates community. It creates family, which is beneficial to ongoing evolutionary processes. Humans are social creatures, and therefore, having a solid society that looks out for each other, that is beneficial to the survival of all. So you're just wrong again, I see. Physical facts can usually be observed and measured, but purported moral facts don't seem to refer to physical objects or to things which can be physically observed. How can you measure justice in a laboratory? Well, they don't seem to understand what concepts are. Justice isn't a physical thing. It's a concept held in the brain. And as a concept, it demonstrably works and provides for safer and stronger communities of humans, which, as I said, are evolutionarily advantageous. Morals come about through empathy and enlightened self-interest. We don't want anyone to come along and murder us or rob us or rape us, so we don't do those things to other people in the hopes that they will just reciprocate with us. That's all morality ultimately is. It doesn't matter if you like that or not, it just is. So if, like many atheists today, we insist that only empirically measurable natural entities exist, how can we simultaneously hold that moral facts exist? Welcome to the straw man. Nobody says that except for the religious, projecting their faith and fifis onto others. There are no objective moral facts. Deal with it. It doesn't matter what anybody wants to be true. It doesn't matter what anyone believes, atheists included. It matters what they can demonstrate, and none of them are even trying. Just because plenty of people are really uncomfortable thinking morals aren't objective, that doesn't mean that they are. You need to be able to demonstrate that they are in order to be rational in your claim. Go right ahead. Do something. Second, on what basis do we insist that human beings have some intrinsic value that we are obligated to respect? Well, here's a novel idea. They don't. Oh, I know that makes a lot of people uncomfortable, but that's irrelevant. Wanting to believe a thing doesn't make that thing true. If there is a God and human beings are made in his image, then he can impart value on them. If isn't because. This is a ludicrously common problem, where the religious will say if, they just assume it has to be true, because they say so, because they really like the idea. But that doesn't make it true. There is no demonstrable God that made humans in its own image. There is no evidence that humans were made at all. We evolved. We're just animals. Deal with it. We are the way that we are because of the evolutionary processes and pressures that existed when we developed. We were not planned. We just turned out this way. And you can watch the religious who are just desperate to get back to their beliefs, trying to make a hard left at Albuquerque because that's where they want to be. Don't let them do it without rational justification. Faith is not justification. It just isn't. But if human beings are merely complex, self-contained biochemical reactions, what makes them objectively more valuable than any other complex, self-contained biochemical reaction, like the one I carry out in test tubes in my biology class and then pour down the sink? They're not! Get over yourself! Deal with it! We are only important to us. If you go out in the wild and find a hungry lion, they don't care about the objective value of humans. They're going to eat your ass if they can. This is just ego out of control. They just really want it to be true. But that doesn't make it true. This is just an assertion, and assertions need to be backed up to be taken seriously. And they can't do it. It just hurts their feelings not to feel special. So they have to make up a reason why they are, even though objectively they're not. This is really, really, really dumb. Knock it off. Finally, why are we morally obligated to do anything at all, whether to respect the environment or love other human beings or seek the truth? We're not. I mean, people in society holds us personally accountable for the things that we do and punishes us if we step out of line too badly. If that's what you mean, sure, maybe. I mean, the cop who gives you a ticket for speeding, they're just holding you accountable to the law. You aren't morally obligated to drive the speed limit. You do it because you don't want to pay the fine. You get to make the decision whether you want to risk it and drive faster or to do what society as a whole has decided you ought to do and not have to pay. This is an ought, it's not an is. The speed limit is what society has decided. It's not what they are morally obligated to decide. You people just don't understand how reality works, do you? We may perform certain actions out of self-interest or as a consequence of our personal preferences or because of instinctive biological urges. But if there is no transcendent moral lawgiver who obligates us to act in a certain way, then how can we insist that there is a transcendent objective moral law? We don't! Stop projecting! This is you, not us. This is your feelings, not reality. So far, this entire thing has just been, but I really like the idea. But liking the idea doesn't make it true. Just because it appeals to you on an emotional level, that doesn't make it rational, and it doesn't make it true. And I thought the whole point of this whole article was that it was rational, but apparently not. Let me go back and look. Title, Is Belief in God Rational? Based on what I've seen so far, the answer is clearly no. It is on the basis of these and other objections that the aforementioned atheist philosophers concluded that premise 1 of the moral argument is true. If God does not exist, then objective moral facts do not exist. It is possible that they are wrong in holding this belief, but it is difficult to insist that they are irrational in holding this belief, since it is based on philosophical argument rather than on emotion or pragmatism. First off, they don't hold that belief. No atheist philosopher is going to say, if God doesn't exist, blah, 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 because they don't believe in God. Jesus, you can't be this fucking stupid. Well, I don't know. Maybe you can. Again, I don't care what anyone says. I care what they can demonstrate. Saying objective morality just makes me feel good doesn't mean objective morality is true. And that's just stupid. This whole thing is just stupid. This kind of thing is actually testable, and those tests reveal that objective morality is complete nonsense. There isn't a single, all-encompassing moral view that is shared across all of humanity across time and space. It just doesn't exist. If it did, then we'd have no need for prisons because there would be no criminals. Nobody would murder if murder was objectively wrong and written on everyone's hearts, or whatever the fuck you people say, which I guess sounds kind of messy, but there you go. This is why they have to just invent stuff, because it doesn't actually look like the stuff that they want to believe is true. They desperately want there to be a God, but the world doesn't look like there's a God. So they just have to make up all kinds of bald rationalizations for why, well, there just has to be a God, and here's why it looks so suspiciously otherwise. But that is not impressive. That is not rational. This is why rational isn't, well, I've got a reason that I like, therefore it's got to be rational. No, that is not how it works. Anyway, we're just going to stop here for the week just before we get to premise 2, because this is A, going to be really, really, really long otherwise, and B, premise 1 was such a complete mess that I don't think I could stomach another one this fast. So far, I'm just not at all impressed, not that I really thought that I would be. I would love to be, whether the religious believe that or not, but I'm just not. This is just speaking out from within your religious bubble, saying things that would only appeal to an existing religious audience, because, of course, that's who Neil is trying to reach. Now, I get it, I guess. A lot of people are in this to make money or get notoriety, things like that, but I never created this channel to preach to the choir. Yes, I understand that's going to happen because people tend to follow what provides the message that you want to consume, but I would really love to have a sizable contingent of rational theists, even though I'm pretty much convinced that such things don't actually exist. So far, at least, I've yet to see a single comment that has demonstrably shown me otherwise, but I guess hope springs eternal, and someday, maybe. Not holding my breath, but maybe. I mean, I'd be happy if somebody would even try, but so far, that hasn't happened. Still, though, go ahead and let me know your thoughts down in the comments on this half of the video. Is Neil making any decent points at all? Why or why not? We'll be back in a week for part 2 to see if he can justify his second premise and conclusion, and I really don't think so, but hey, I guess we'll have to see, won't we?